Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? The storm had been building for hours. Thick clouds, like smothering blankets, rolled in across the horizon, swallowing the last sliver of daylight. In the distance, the sound of thunder reverberated across the silent town, a warning of what was to come. People in the small town of Briar Hollow had learned long ago not to ignore the weather when it turned. But this time, something felt different. Lena stood by her kitchen window, peering out at the darkening skies. The wind howled, rattling the panes of glass as if trying to claw its way inside. It wasn't the storm that made her uneasy, though. It was the shadows. They were wrong. There was a chill in the air, one that crept up her spine and made her heart race. She had lived in Briar Hollow her entire life, and no storm had ever felt like this. As a child, she had been told stories about strange occurrences that had plagued the town long before she was born. Disappearances, eerie lights, and whispers in the wind, but she never put much stock in them. Her father had always laughed it off, dismissing the tales as superstition. But tonight, the stories felt too close for comfort. Her phone buzzed on the countertop, snapping her out of her thoughts. She glanced at the screen and saw a message from her friend Mark. "You see the lights in the woods. Don't go near them. Just stay inside." Lena's fingers trembled as she typed a quick reply. "What lights? Are you serious?" Before Mark could respond, the sound of a heavy knock echoed from the front door. Startled, Lena's breath caught in her throat. She wasn't expecting anyone. The town was quiet this time of night, and the storm had driven everyone indoors. Another knock, louder this time. Lena hesitated. Who would be out there in this weather? And why were they knocking so urgently? She slowly made her way to the door, her heart pounding in her chest. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as she reached for the handle. She opened it, but there was no one there. She frowned, scanning the front porch and the yard beyond. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, swallowing everything in its path. That's when she saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the woods, barely visible through the veil of rain and wind. It was tall, impossibly so, and seemed to flicker in and out of existence, as though it wasn't entirely there. Lena's breath caught in her throat. Her mind screamed for her to close the door, to lock it, and never look back, but her body refused to move. The figure took a step forward. Suddenly, Lena's phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Mark. She snapped out of her trance, quickly answering it. "Mark, what's going on? What's out there? You saw it, didn't you?" Mark's voice was low, shaky. "The thing in the woods." "Lena, it's not what you think. It's coming for us." Before she could ask what he meant, the line went dead. The phone slipped from her hand as panic set in. She glanced back toward the woods, but the figure was gone. She blinked, trying to clear her mind, but when her eyes refocused on the spot where the figure had stood, it was as if the woods had swallowed it whole. There was nothing there but the rustling of the trees and the whistling of the wind. But she knew. She knew something had been there. A soft, cold breeze blew past her, sending a shiver down her spine. She slammed the door shut and locked it, then backed away from it, her breath shallow and erratic. The storm raged outside, but inside the house, a suffocating silence settled in. Lena moved toward the living room, trying to shake off the feeling that she was being watched. She tried to calm her racing thoughts, but it was no use. Every creak of the house, every flicker of the lights made her jump. She wasn't alone. She couldn't be. The feeling was overwhelming, suffocating. Then, as if on cue, there was another knock on the door. This time it was different. This knock wasn't just a random, frantic attempt to get in. It was slow, methodical, persistent. Her heart pounded in her chest, and her mind screamed at her to run. but there was nowhere to go. The storm outside was relentless, and the town was miles away. She was alone in the middle of nowhere. Another knock, louder. "Lena," a voice called, soft and whispering. "Lena, open the door." It was a voice she didn't recognize. The voice was chilling, like ice running through her veins. It was closer this time, just on the other side of the door, as if the speaker had somehow gotten inside without her noticing. Lena stepped back, her mind racing. She turned toward the back door, but the faint sound of shuffling footsteps from the kitchen froze her in place. She wasn't sure whether she was imagining things, but she swore she could hear the sound of something. Someone. Moving behind her, creeping closer. Desperate, she grabbed the nearest object, a heavy candlestick, and turned toward the noise. But as she turned, the figure she had seen outside appeared in the doorway, its towering form blocking the path. Its eyes glowed a pale yellow, like the embers of a dying fire. Its features were obscured, but there was something unmistakably wrong about it. Its shape shifted in and out of focus, its movements too fluid, too unnatural. Lena could hear its breathing, deep and labored. As it stepped closer to her, frozen, she couldn't move. She couldn't breathe. The figure stopped just inches away from her, its cold breath fanning across her face. Then, in a voice that didn't belong to it, it whispered, "Lena, I'm here for you." Suddenly, everything went dark. The room spun, and Lena stumbled backward, collapsing onto the floor. The world around her seemed to twist and warp, and she felt the weight of the darkness press in from all sides. Then, just as quickly as it had started, everything went silent. The figure, the storm, the knocking, gone. Lena lay on the floor, gasping for breath, her mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. She had to be hallucinating. There was no way any of this could be real. It couldn't be. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just her imagination. Something was coming, and it was already here. Lena's breath came in ragged gasps as she lay on the cold, hard floor of her living room. The room was eerily silent now, save for the faint sound of the storm raging outside. Her heart thudded in her chest, its beats echoing in her ears like a war drum. She tried to push herself up, but her body felt heavy, as though the weight of the darkness itself had pressed down on her, trapping her in place. What had just happened? Was she dreaming? No, it was too vivid, too real. Her eyes darted around the room, scanning for any sign of movement. The figure, the thing she had seen outside, had disappeared, leaving behind nothing but the remnants of a silence that gnawed at her soul. But it wasn't just the absence of the creature that made her uneasy. It was the feeling, the sensation of something still watching her, lingering just beyond her reach. She tried to stand, her legs shaky beneath her. The room tilted and swayed, and for a moment, Lena thought she might collapse again. Her fingers gripped the edge of the sofa for support as she regained her balance. But then, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed through the house. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The footsteps were slow, deliberate. Each step was like a hammer striking an anvil, reverberating through the floorboards, the walls, the air itself. She froze, her mind racing. Was it inside her house? Was it still here? The figure, or something worse. She backed away toward the hallway, her fingers trembling as she reached for her phone. She quickly unlocked it, fingers flying over the screen. Mark's name was at the top of her messages. She needed to call him, needed to hear his voice. Maybe, just maybe, he could help her make sense of all of this. But before she could tap the call button, the footsteps stopped. The silence returned, suffocating and thick, filling the space between Lena's breaths. A voice, soft, almost tender, whispered through the dark. "Lena, you didn't think you could escape, did you?" The words were like a knife slicing through her chest. The voice was unmistakable. The same voice that had whispered to her earlier. The voice of the thing that had appeared at her door. It was here, It had never left. Lena's heart raced, her pulse pounding in her throat. She didn't know what it wanted, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to sit around and wait for it to find her. With all the strength she could muster, Lena dashed for the door. Her hands fumbled with the lock, the cold metal slipping between her fingers. The wind outside howled, a reminder that the storm still raged. But she didn't care. She had to get out. She had to run. But just as her fingers brushed the handle, the door slammed shut on its own with a deafening bang. Lena jumped back, her heart pounding in her chest. She spun around, eyes wide with fear, only to see a shadow moving at the end of the hallway. The figure. It was much closer now, its outline barely visible in the dim light of the house. But it was there, and it was moving toward her. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but the fear held her in place, her body frozen in terror. The thing's form twisted and distorted in the shadows, its outline shifting like a mirage. It had no shape, no distinct features. Only those glowing yellow eyes, burning through the darkness like twin flames. "Lena," it whispered again, its voice deep and distorted, like it was being dragged through the air itself. "You cannot escape what you have summoned." Summoned. Lena's mind reeled. She had no idea what it was talking about. She didn't summon anything. It was just a storm, a coincidence, a freak of nature. She tried to take a step back, but her feet wouldn't move. Her legs were locked in place, her body trapped in fear. She was paralyzed, unable to run, unable to scream. The figure reached out, its elongated hand reaching toward her, fingers twitching as if eager to touch her, to pull her into the depths of the darkness. And then it spoke again, its voice now unmistakably chilling, filled with malice and despair. "Lena, you are not alone. You never were." Before Lena could react, everything went black. The lights in the house flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, plunging her into a darkness deeper than the night outside. She heard a low growl from somewhere close, but it wasn't from the figure. No, this was something else. A flash of movement caught her eye, a shadow darting across the room, faster than humanly possible. Something else was in the house. Lena's pulse spiked. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew it wasn't just the figure anymore. Something had changed. The air was thick with a presence, something ancient and unknowable, something that had been waiting for this moment. The house groaned under the weight of the storm, but this time, it wasn't just the wind. It was something else, something that made the walls feel as if they were closing in around her, suffocating her. And then she heard it, a scream, a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the house, its source impossible to pinpoint. It wasn't hers. Suddenly, the floor beneath her feet shifted, and Lena stumbled, nearly falling to the ground. She had to get out of there. She had to run. But where could she go? Every window was covered in rain, the storm outside pounding relentlessly against the glass. Every exit was blocked, every corner of the house felt like a prison. The figure was getting closer, its presence undeniable. The walls seemed to pulse, like the house itself was alive, as if it was part of the creature, feeding off its darkness. Lena's heart was in her throat, her vision blurred. Her hands shook uncontrollably. She needed help. She needed someone to get her out of there. But there was no one. No one could help her now. The figure stopped in front of her, its eyes glowing brighter than ever. A twisted grin stretched across its face, though there was no mouth to speak of. It wasn't human. It never had been. And just as she thought she couldn't take it anymore, it spoke again, its voice like 1,000 whispers merging into one. "You should have stayed away from the woods." Lena's breath was ragged. Each inhale, a desperate attempt to calm the storm brewing in her chest. The figure loomed in front of her, its glowing eyes the only source of light in the suffocating darkness of the house. It was as if the darkness itself had become a living, breathing entity, tightening around her, making every movement feel like an insurmountable effort. "You should have stayed away from the woods," the figure whispered again, its voice now echoing in the space around her, a low, hissing sound that reverberated through the walls. The words felt like they were clawing at her soul, scraping against the very fibers of her being. Lena's knees buckled, and she stumbled backward, her hands reaching out blindly for anything to steady herself. But there was nothing but the cold, oppressive air that surrounded her, thick with an ancient presence she couldn't begin to understand. Her mind was in a haze, memories flashing through her like a distorted film reel. The woods. The strange lights Mark had mentioned. Her father's warnings. The stories of people who had vanished, never to be seen again. Could it be? Was it all real? Had she unknowingly walked into something much darker than she could have ever imagined? The figure took a slow step forward, its form shifting and warping, as if it wasn't entirely of this world. It seemed to bend and twist, its silhouette flickering like a dying flame, casting distorted shadows across the walls. Lena tried to scream, but the sound was strangled in her throat. Panic surged through her as her eyes darted around, searching for an escape, any escape. But the room seemed to stretch on forever, and the walls were closing in. "You're not the first." The figure spoke again, its voice softer now, as though it was savoring each word. "And you won't be the last." A shiver ran down Lena's spine. What did that mean? What had she stumbled upon? Her mind raced, but the questions only seemed to deepen the terror. She needed to get out of there, but how? Where could she run when the very house felt like it was alive, pressing in on her from all sides? The figure's eyes glowed brighter, more intense now, as though it was feeding off her fear. Lena felt her legs weaken, and she crumpled to the floor, unable to stand any longer. Her body trembled uncontrollably as the figure came closer, its form now a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to pull at the very air around it. "You were never meant to be here," it said, its voice a haunting whisper that sent chills through her bones. "You are a part of something far bigger than you know. You have awakened it." Lena's heart thundered in her chest. What was it talking about? What had she awakened? In that moment, everything seemed to click into place. The strange feelings she had experienced, the unexplained phenomena that had begun to escalate in the town. The storm, the figure, it was all connected. She had unknowingly stepped into something that was beyond her comprehension. The room shifted again, the walls warping and distorting like ripples in a pool of water. Lena felt herself being dragged toward the center of the room, her body moving against her will. She tried to fight it, to scream, but her voice was lost in the chaos. The figure loomed over her now, its presence overwhelming, filling the space with an unbearable weight. It reached down, its long fingers brushing against her cheek. Its touch was cold, colder than anything she had ever felt before, like ice, like death. And then, in the blink of an eye, everything stopped. The figure withdrew, stepping back into the shadows, its eyes still glowing faintly in the darkness. Lena's breathing slowed, though her heart still raced. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew one thing for sure: she was no longer in control. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. "You will see," the figure said, its voice now distant, like a memory fading into the past. "You will understand soon enough." And with that, it vanished, as though it had never been there at all. Lena sat on the floor, gasping for breath, her mind reeling from the encounter. She couldn't move, couldn't think. The room was still dark, the storm still raging outside, but the oppressive sense of dread had lifted. For now, at least. What had just happened? Was it real? Was any of it real? Her mind was a whirlwind of questions, but before she could gather her thoughts, the phone in her pocket buzzed. She pulled it out, her hands trembling as she saw Mark's name on the screen. She quickly answered it, desperate for some kind of clarity, some kind of connection to the world outside of her own terror. "Lena?" Mark's voice came through the speaker, shaky and desperate. "Are you all right? I saw the lights, and then the trees, they moved. It's happening again, Lena. The thing, it's coming. You need to get out of there. Get out now." Lena's mind raced. Lights, trees, what was he talking about? She didn't have time to ask him anything before he continued. "You've awakened it, haven't you?" he said, his voice growing frantic. "You shouldn't have gone near the woods. No one does. It's been waiting, Lena, waiting for someone to find it. And now that you have, it won't stop." Lena's chest tightened, and she fought to control her breathing. She wanted to tell him everything. About the figure, about what had happened in her house, but there were no words. Nothing that could explain the horror she had just witnessed. "I don't know what you're talking about," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper, but her words were hollow. She felt the truth of Mark's words sinking in, the weight of it pressing down on her chest. "Get out of there, Lena," Mark repeated, urgency in his voice. "Now, it's not just the woods, it's everywhere." Before Lena could respond, the line went dead. The call ended abruptly, and she stared at the screen in disbelief. It was happening again. Whatever this was, it wasn't just confined to her house or the woods. It was spreading, and Lena had no idea how to stop it. Lena sat on the cold, hard floor, the weight of Mark's words sinking deeper with every passing second. She didn't understand what was happening. How could she? But one thing was certain. Whatever this was, it was far beyond anything she could have prepared for. The phone in her hand felt like a foreign object, its once comforting presence, now just another reminder of her helplessness. She stared at the screen for a moment longer, half expecting Mark to call back. But there was only silence. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the house, the air had become heavy, thick with an energy she couldn't explain. Lena forced herself to her feet, her legs unsteady, and slowly moved toward the living room window. She pulled back the curtain, her eyes immediately drawn to the darkness outside. The storm had not let up, but the wind had shifted, pushing the rain in sheets against the window. And then she saw it. At the edge of the woods, just beyond the clearing, there was a faint, flickering light. It was a pale yellow, almost like a firefly, but too large, too steady. It pulsed slowly, erratically, as though it was calling her. Lena's pulse quickened. This couldn't be a coincidence. Mark had mentioned the lights in the woods earlier, but she hadn't truly believed him. Not until now. The light was real. It was there. And it was waiting. She could feel it, as if the light was reaching for her, pulling her in. Her thoughts raced, and for a brief moment she considered going outside, following it. The idea filled her with dread, but also something else. Something insistent. She shook her head, forcing herself to focus. No, she couldn't. The figure, whatever it was, had already warned her. It was too dangerous. But something else tugged at her, a feeling deep within her chest. What if Mark was right? What if this was bigger than just the house, bigger than just the woods? The entire town seemed to be under some kind of influence. She had to figure out what was going on. She had to understand it. And the only way she could see to do that was to get closer. The light flickered again, this time brighter, as if it knew she was watching. "No," she whispered to herself, her voice hoarse. "I need to stay away." But her feet moved of their own accord, her legs carrying her toward the door, as if some unseen force had taken over. She reached for the handle, but as soon as her fingers brushed the cold metal, a loud crash echoed from behind her. Lena spun around, her heart jumping into her throat. The front door was wide open, and standing in the doorway was a figure, a man, tall, with wild, dark hair and a wide, crooked grin that stretched far too far across his face. Lena's body froze. Lena, the man's voice was calm, almost too calm. It's time. The words sent a jolt of panic through her. She didn't know this man. She had never seen him before in her life. But somehow, she knew. She knew he was part of whatever was happening. He stepped forward, his movements deliberate, measured. Each step he took seemed to make the darkness around him grow thicker, like he was pulling the shadows toward him. "What do you want?" Lena asked, her voice barely a whisper. She didn't trust herself to speak louder. She didn't trust her own body, which still seemed to move against her will. The man chuckled, a low, guttural sound that made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. "I want what was promised," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. There was a glint in them, an unsettling gleam that made her blood run cold. "You and I have been waiting for this moment, haven't we?" Lena took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest. Waiting for this moment. What did he mean? Before she could say anything, the man raised his hand, and the room seemed to distort. The walls warped, bending in on themselves, the shadows in the corners of the room stretching, twisting. It was as though the house itself was breathing, alive and aware of their presence. "Lena, you've already taken the first step," he said, his voice taking on a more sinister tone. "The woods are calling, and it's time for you to answer." A shiver ran down Lena's spine. The figure, the woods, the lights, everything was connected. This man, this creature, was part of it all. "You're not human, are you?" Lena managed to say, her voice trembling. The man's grin widened, his teeth sharp and white against the darkness. "No," he replied simply. "I'm much older than that. Much older than you could ever comprehend." Lena's legs felt weak again, and she stumbled backward, almost tripping over the edge of the coffee table. But the man wasn't finished. He took another step forward, his gaze never leaving hers. "You see, Lena," he continued, his voice now thick with dark amusement. "You were never meant to live in the light. You've been marked. The moment you stepped into those woods, the moment you saw those lights, you became a part of something bigger, something far darker." Lena's mind spun. This couldn't be happening. It didn't make sense. But there was no denying the terror clawing at her insides, the palpable fear that seemed to seep into every fiber of her being. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice barely audible now. "What do you want me to do?" The man didn't answer immediately. He simply smiled, a smile that stretched too wide, too unnaturally. Then, in a voice like a whisper carried on the wind, he said, "Come to the woods. Come to the heart of it all, and I will show you everything." Without waiting for her response, the man turned and began walking toward the door, his figure disappearing into the darkness outside. Lena stood there, rooted to the spot, her mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket, but she didn't dare look. The man had told her to come to the woods, to answer the call. But what would happen if she did? What would she find? And more importantly, what would she become? The storm outside raged louder, its winds howling like the cries of the lost. The figure in the doorway had vanished, but the promise of his words hung in the air like a curse. The woods were waiting. Lena's heart raced as she stood frozen at the door, staring into the storm beyond. The wind howled like a beast, pushing against the house, rattling the windows and shaking the very foundations of the world around her. The figure had disappeared into the night, leaving nothing behind but his chilling words. "Come to the woods. Come to the heart of it all, and I will show you everything." Lena couldn't move. Her body felt heavy, as though the very air around her was holding her in place, preventing her from running, from thinking. But inside, her mind screamed. She had to go. She had to find out what was happening. What had happened to her, to this town, to Mark. But what if she was walking right into the heart of something that was beyond saving? Her phone buzzed again. Lena's eyes darted down to the screen, her hand trembling as she picked it up. This time, it was a text from Mark. Her fingers fumbled over the keys as she opened it. Lena, don't do it. The figure, the lights, it's all connected. It's not just some crazy storm or a bad dream. They're here, and they're coming for you. Don't go into the woods. Please. She read the message again, feeling the weight of it press on her chest, but it didn't stop her from reaching for the coat hanging by the door. She had to know. The woods. The lights. The figure. She needed to see it all, to understand it. Without another thought, Lena yanked open the door and stepped out into the storm. The cold air hit her like a slap. But it wasn't just the chill that took her breath away. It was the feeling. The presence, something watching, waiting from the darkness beyond the house. The door slammed shut behind her as she stepped onto the porch, her boots sinking slightly into the wet earth. The wind carried the scent of rain, damp leaves, and something else, something metallic like blood. Lena's heart pounded in her chest, but she didn't stop. The lights. She had to follow them. With every step she took toward the woods, the sense of something being wrong grew stronger. The trees loomed in the distance, their bare branches creaking in the wind like gnarled fingers reaching out to grab her. The light in the distance pulsed again, bright and steady, like it was calling her name. The closer she got, the more the air seemed to thicken, as though the storm was pressing down, suffocating her. It was difficult to breathe, difficult to move. The trees around her seemed to shift, their shapes twisting as though they were alive, watching her, waiting. Don't go any further, a voice whispered in her mind, but she pushed it aside. She couldn't turn back now. She had to know. The light grew brighter with each step, flickering like a beacon. Lena's eyes strained against the darkness, and as she entered the trees, the light grew blinding, forcing her to shield her eyes. She could hear the faint sound of something moving in the underbrush, the soft rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs underfoot. Something was following her, but she didn't turn around. She kept moving, determined to reach the source of the light, whatever it was. And then, without warning, the ground beneath her feet shifted. Lena gasped, stumbling as the earth gave way beneath her, her feet sliding on the slick ground. She barely managed to catch herself on a nearby tree, her breath coming in sharp gasps. What was happening? Her head spun as she looked down, her gaze widening as she saw the earth had cracked open. A deep, jagged fissure ran through the ground, glowing with a faint, unnatural light, just like the one she had seen in the distance. Before she could react, a low growl rumbled from the depths of the crack, a deep, throaty sound that sent shivers crawling down her spine. Lena's eyes widened in terror as she stepped back, but it was too late. From the crack, something began to emerge. It was like a shadow, an unnatural thing, stretching and twisting as if it was made of darkness itself. The air grew colder. The wind howled louder, whipping through the trees as if the storm itself had awakened. And then she saw it, its eyes. They were glowing, like the eyes of the figure from her house, only these were darker, deeper, filled with an infinite hunger. The creature, if it could be called that, was tall, too tall, its limbs stretching unnaturally long, twisted and wrong. It didn't speak, but Lena could hear its voice in her mind, a chorus of whispers that sent her heart into overdrive. You have come. You have opened the door. Now you will see what lies beneath. She took a step back, but her legs betrayed her. She stumbled and fell, the ground beneath her shifting as if it was alive, trying to swallow her. The air around her grew thick, suffocating, and the whispers in her mind grew louder. No. Lena thought, her body trembling with fear. This can't be real. This isn't real. But it was. The creature reached out with one long, clawed hand, its fingers twitching as it seemed to sense her fear, feeding on it. The ground trembled beneath her, the trees shaking, as though the entire forest was alive and reacting to its presence. Lena scrambled backward, trying to stand, trying to run, but her body was frozen, paralyzed with terror. The creature's glowing eyes bore into her, and for a moment, she thought she saw something behind those eyes, something ancient, something older than time itself, watching her, waiting for her to fall. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the creature stepped back into the shadows, the fissure in the ground closing with a deafening crack, leaving only silence in its wake. Lena's heart thundered in her chest, her hands shaking violently as she pulled herself to her feet. Her mind was reeling, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The creature was gone, but the feeling of its presence lingered, a suffocating weight pressing on her chest. She didn't know what she had just witnessed, but she knew one thing: it was far from over. She had opened the door, and now there was no going back. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Lena fumbled for it, her fingers numb with fear. She opened the message, desperate for some kind of answer, some kind of help. "Lena, whatever you do, don't trust the woods. It's a trap. The lights are a lure. They want you to come closer. You've been marked. Get out of there, numb." Mark's message sent a jolt of fear through her. It wasn't over. The woods, the creature, it was all connected, and she was the key. The phone slipped from her trembling hands as a voice, soft and whispering, filled her mind again. "It's already begun." Lena didn't need to look up to know that it was there. Lena didn't dare look up. She couldn't. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to flee from the woods. But her feet felt rooted to the spot. The air around her had thickened again, heavy with a pressure she could almost taste. Every breath she took was like inhaling wet, chilled air, suffocating her from the inside out. She could hear her own heartbeat, deafening in the silence, as if it were the only thing left that was real. "It's already begun." The words echoed in her mind, rattling her thoughts. The voice had been soft, soothing almost, but it had carried the weight of an ancient truth. Whatever had been unleashed when she set foot in the woods, whatever she had awakened, was not just a force. It was a presence, and it was aware of her. Lena blinked rapidly, trying to focus, trying to shake the fog that had settled over her. But no matter how hard she tried, the reality of her situation refused to relent. She had come into the woods, drawn to it by the flickering lights, by the strange pull that had seemed impossible to resist. And now, she was tangled in something much larger than herself. Something old. Something that wanted her. The hairs on the back of her neck stood on end as a low rumbling sound vibrated through the ground beneath her. It was a deep, resonant hum, the sound of something huge and ancient awakening. The forest seemed to shift, its branches swaying unnaturally in the wind. The rustling of the trees no longer felt natural. It was as if they were reaching for her, like fingers stretching toward the sky, drawn to some unseen force. Her body trembled with fear. The silence had been broken, and now there was something else. Something waiting in the shadows, watching her. The pulse of the light in the distance flickered again, stronger now, urging her forward. It was too much. Lena's mind raced, her thoughts scrambling to make sense of everything, but she couldn't. She had to keep going. Her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her forward despite every warning, every instinct to turn back. She had to find the source of the light. She had to understand what was happening. She didn't know how, but she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was unfolding, whatever was lurking just beyond her reach, was the key to everything. Her footsteps echoed in the stillness as she walked deeper into the forest. The trees seemed to close in around her, casting long, twisted shadows across the ground. The air had grown thick again, and the wind had died, leaving an oppressive stillness in its wake. The light ahead of her grew brighter, its pulse steady and rhythmic, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. As Lena pushed forward, her thoughts drifted back to Mark's message. The woods were a trap. The lights were a lure. He had warned her, but she hadn't listened. What had she unleashed? What was waiting for her in the heart of this place? With each step, the ground beneath her seemed to vibrate more strongly, the low rumbling intensifying until she could feel it deep in her bones. She was close. Too close. And then she saw it. The light before her was no longer just a flicker in the distance. It was bright, blinding, a swirling mass of light and shadow. It hung in the air, suspended above the ground, pulsing like a living thing. It was as if the very essence of the forest had taken form, twisting into something she could not comprehend. The trees around it seemed to bow, their branches arching toward the light in reverence, as though they were not trees at all but something else, something ancient, tied to the very core of the earth. Lena stopped. She couldn't breathe. The air was thick with something she couldn't name, something powerful and hungry and alive. She reached out a trembling hand, drawn to it, unable to stop herself. The moment her fingers brushed against the air, the ground beneath her feet shifted violently. She stumbled, falling to her knees as the earth trembled beneath her. A loud, guttural roar ripped through the silence, shaking the very trees around her. The light flickered, and then, in an instant, the world around her distorted. The forest, the trees, the ground, all of it twisted, bending, warping as if the very fabric of reality was being stretched and pulled in every direction. Lena gasped, her body falling backward as the ground cracked open beneath her. The light above her flared brighter, blinding her. And in the midst of the chaos, a figure emerged. It was tall, too tall, and for a moment, Lena thought it was the same creature she had seen before, the one that had appeared at her door. But this was different. The figure seemed to stretch and shift, like smoke, like shadows given form. Its face was a blank void, a black hole where its features should have been. And its eyes, if they could be called eyes, were pools of inky darkness, endless and all-consuming. It reached out, its arm extending impossibly long, and Lena's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run, to escape, but her legs were frozen, her body paralyzed by an unseen force. "You have come," the figure said, its voice like 1,000 whispers scraping against her mind. "And now you will understand." The ground beneath her trembled again, and the figure's hand descended toward her, the darkness in its eyes drawing her in. Lena screamed, but no sound escaped her lips. The world around her shifted once more, and she felt herself being pulled into the void, into the blackness that seemed to engulf everything. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, everything stopped. The figure was gone. The light faded, dimming until there was only darkness. Lena was lying on the ground, gasping for air, her body drenched in sweat, her heart still racing. The forest was silent now, too silent. There was no rumbling, no growl, no shifting of the earth, just the eerie stillness that followed a storm. Lena pushed herself to her feet, her legs shaking, her mind reeling from what she had just witnessed. What had happened? What had she seen? It had all felt so real, so terrifying, but now it was gone. She looked around, but the forest was empty. The figure, the light, the darkness, it was all gone, vanished as if it had never existed. But Lena knew better. The woods hadn't released her. She hadn't escaped. It was just waiting for her to make the next move. And the next time she ventured into its heart, there would be no turning back. Lena's hands shook as she stumbled through the woods, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The silence around her was deafening, pressing against her like a weight. Every step she took felt like it was taking her deeper into a nightmare. The figure, the light, the twisted darkness, they all lingered in her mind like shadows she couldn't escape. The forest had become something else, something alive, something that knew her. She didn't know how long she had been walking, but the trees around her seemed to stretch endlessly. They no longer looked like trees, but something else, something unnatural, with gnarled branches that reached toward the sky like twisted hands. The underbrush had become thicker, more tangled, as though the forest was deliberately trying to trap her, to keep her here. The air was thick with moisture, and the wind had died completely. There was no sound, no movement, except for the faint, distant crackle of something. Maybe the storm, maybe something else entirely. Lena's thoughts were swirling in a haze, the images of the creature's blank face, the glowing darkness, flashing before her eyes in rapid succession. She had to get out. She had to find a way back to the town. But every direction she looked, the forest stretched on. The trees growing denser, their twisted shapes blocking out any sign of the sky. She couldn't even see the lights she had followed. They were gone. The woods had swallowed them whole. Lena's legs gave out beneath her, and she collapsed to the ground, gasping for breath. She could feel the weight of the forest pressing on her chest, suffocating her, and she fought against the panic rising in her throat. What was this place? What was it doing to her? She had to remember. Mark's warnings, the warnings from the figure. She had come here for answers, but she had never been meant to find them. The forest was not just a place. It was something else. It was a trap, a living entity that had been waiting for her, for someone to awaken it. But why her? Why was she the one chosen to see what others had only whispered about in fear? Lena's hand moved to her pocket, pulling out her phone. Her fingers trembling as she tried to unlock it. The screen flickered for a moment, and then, nothing. Dead, the battery had died, leaving her with no way to call for help. The reality of the situation slammed into her with terrifying clarity. She was alone. Alone in the woods with something she didn't understand. A sound broke the silence. A soft rustling, followed by the unmistakable snap of a twig. Lena's heart skipped a beat as she whipped her head toward the source of the noise, her breath caught in her throat. The rustling came again, closer this time. It was not the wind. It was something else, someone else. Her instincts screamed at her to move, to get up and run, but her body was frozen. She couldn't move. Her mind was filled with flashes of the creature, those eyes, hunting her, waiting for her to make a mistake. The rustling grew louder, closer, and then she saw it. At the edge of her vision, a figure stepped from behind the trees, emerging from the shadows like a nightmare-given form. It was tall, its body wrapped in tattered, dark robes that seemed to shift with the movement of the forest, blending with the shadows. The face, it was covered, hidden beneath a hood, but Lena could feel the eyes on her, staring into her soul. The figure didn't speak. It didn't need to. Lena's mind raced. Was this the same creature from before, the one that had warned her? Or was it something else entirely? Her fear surged, but she couldn't bring herself to move. The figure stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. It didn't seem to care that she was on the ground, paralyzed with fear. It didn't seem to care about anything at all. "What do you want from me?" The question echoed in her mind, but she couldn't speak the words. Her throat was tight, constricted with the weight of her terror. The figure stopped in front of her, its presence suffocating, the air thick with an unseen pressure. And then, in a voice that was neither human nor animal, it spoke. "You have been chosen, Lena." The words hit her like a slap. Chosen. For what? What did that even mean? She had been living her life, oblivious to the madness that surrounded her, and now she was here, standing in the middle of a forest that seemed to bend to something far darker than anything she could understand. The figure didn't wait for her response. It moved again, closer this time, and Lena could feel the darkness pressing in. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but her body refused to obey. She was trapped. "You are a part of it now." The figure continued. Its voice cold, its tone final. There is no turning back. You've crossed the threshold. Crossed the threshold. The words echoed in her mind, but they didn't make sense. What was the threshold? What had she done? A low, rumbling sound filled the air again, and the ground beneath Lena shifted. The earth cracked open once more, and from the darkness, another figure emerged. This one was different, though. It was smaller, more human in shape, but it had a face that looked too human, twisted with an unnatural grin that stretched far too wide. Its eyes glowed an unsettling red, burning with a malevolent hunger. Lena's breath caught in her throat as the figure reached out, its fingers twitching, reaching toward her. No, please. But before she could react, the first figure spoke again, its voice almost gentle now, as though trying to reassure her. You are meant to see. You are meant to know. The ground beneath her trembled again, and the light in the distance flickered. The trees seemed to bend, to sway as if caught in an unseen wind. And the whispers, they were back. The voices, the echoes of something ancient, something that had been waiting for her. You are part of something much older than you understand, Lena. The forest has been waiting for you. Waiting for me. Lena's thoughts whirled, her mind grasping for understanding. But the fear, the terror that gripped her chest, made it impossible to think clearly. The figures, the whispers, the shifting earth, it was all too much. She felt her grip on reality slipping away, and then, as quickly as it had all started, the figures stopped. The rustling of the trees ceased. The ground stopped trembling, and Lena found herself standing alone in the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest, her body trembling with exhaustion and fear. The figures were gone. The light had dimmed, and Lena realized, with a sinking feeling in her stomach, that she had just taken the first step into something much darker than she could have ever imagined. Lena's breath came in shallow, frantic gasps, her hands trembling as she clutched the damp earth beneath her. The clearing was silent now, almost unnervingly so. The figures, the dark creatures that had haunted her moments ago, had disappeared without a trace. The eerie whispers had faded, but their presence lingered, haunting every inch of her being. She couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was breathing, that it was alive in a way she couldn't comprehend. Her mind was racing. What just happened? What did they mean by chosen? Lena pushed herself to her feet, her legs weak from fear and exhaustion. Every movement felt sluggish, as though the weight of the entire forest was pressing down on her, keeping her grounded in place. She glanced around the clearing, her eyes desperately searching for some sign of the way out. The trees that surrounded her seemed to close in tighter, their twisted branches blocking her view, trapping her in a maze of shadows and whispers. For a moment, she considered turning back. She could go home, forget all of this, live her life like she had before. But something deep inside her, a pull that she couldn't ignore, kept her rooted in place. The forest had marked her. It had chosen her. The realization was chilling. She wasn't sure what the consequences of that choice would be, but she had no doubt that whatever force lurked here wasn't going to let her leave so easily. Suddenly, a faint glimmer of light caught her eye. Far off in the distance, beyond the trees, a weak yellow glow flickered. It was the same light she had seen earlier, the one that had drawn her in. Lena's pulse quickened. Her mind screamed at her to stay put, to fight the urge to move toward it. But it was like an invisible hand was guiding her forward, pulling her toward the light against her will. With a hesitant breath, she began walking again, her footsteps heavy and deliberate. The further she walked, the more the forest seemed to warp around her. The trees became denser, their bark twisting into unnatural shapes, their leaves darker than they should be. Her heart thudded in her chest as she reached the edge of the clearing. The light was brighter now, almost blinding in its intensity. It was coming from a small opening between the trees, a gap that seemed to appear just for her, beckoning her to enter. Lena hesitated. The warnings from Mark echoed in her mind. Don't trust the woods. It's a trap. But she couldn't stop herself. The pull was too strong. She stepped forward. The moment she crossed the threshold, the temperature seemed to drop. A cold wind swept through the trees, sending a shiver down her spine. The ground beneath her feet felt soft, almost like it was shifting, unstable. The light ahead was no longer just a flicker. It was a beacon. A swirling mass of energy that hovered just above the ground. It pulsed rhythmically, as if it were alive, breathing. Lena stood frozen at the edge of the light, staring into its depths. It was beautiful, in a way, but there was something inherently wrong about it. The colors seemed to twist and bend, as though they were constantly shifting, never quite the same. It felt alive, and that made Lena's skin crawl. As she stepped closer, a sharp, cold voice echoed in her mind. Come closer. Lena, see the truth. She stumbled, her mind reeling from the words. The truth? What truth? What had she gotten herself into? The whisper grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't just the voice of the figure anymore. It was the voice of the forest itself, or something older, more primal. You must see it. You must understand. You are the key. Her heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the presence of something ancient and powerful gathering around her. The air seemed to hum with energy, the very ground vibrating beneath her feet. Lena stepped forward, drawn to the light like a moth to a flame. But as she crossed the last few feet, the light exploded outward, engulfing her in an intense, blinding radiance. The world around her seemed to shatter. For a split second, Lena felt like she was falling, tumbling through nothingness. The forest, the trees, the earth, all of it vanished, and for a moment she was weightless. Then, with a jarring thud, she landed. She gasped, blinking against the sudden darkness that surrounded her. The light had gone, leaving only a suffocating void in its wake. The forest was gone too. She was no longer standing among the twisted trees, but in a vast, empty space. The ground beneath her feet was smooth, unnaturally so, like polished stone. And in the distance, a dark figure stood. Lena's breath caught in her throat. It was the same figure she had seen in the woods. But now it was different. Its form was less solid, more like a shadow, its edges flickering like flames. Its eyes, those glowing yellow eyes, pierced the darkness, locking onto hers. You've come, it said, its voice now a deep, reverberating hum that seemed to vibrate through her bones. You are the key. Lena tried to speak, but no words came. Her throat was tight, as though the air itself had thickened, preventing her from forming a sound. The figure stepped forward, its movements slow and deliberate. The space around her seemed to contract with each step it took, pressing in on her. The shadows grew darker, thicker, as though the figure itself was pulling the very darkness around it. You were never meant to stay. It continued, its voice now colder, more distant. But now that you are here, there is no escape. Lena's mind raced. What was it talking about? Escape from what? The figure's form seemed to blur, twisting and reshaping itself, before it solidified again. Its eyes glowed brighter, and in that moment, Lena understood. This wasn't just about the woods. It wasn't just about the lights. This was about something older, something far more dangerous than anything she had imagined, and she had walked right into its grasp. You were chosen, Lena. The figure continued, its voice rising, filling the empty space around them. And now, you will become part of the forest. You will become part of the darkness. Lena's body went cold, her blood running ice through her veins. No, she thought, I won't become part of it. I can't. But there was no escape. The darkness pressed in tighter. The figure stepped closer, its eyes now blinding, burning into her very soul. This was it. There was no way out. And then, as the figure reached out toward her, the world around Lena shattered again, plunging her into an abyss of nothingness. Lena's senses exploded with disorientation. She couldn't tell which way was up, down, or sideways. The feeling of falling, the relentless drop that had once filled her with terror, was gone. But she wasn't still. She was somewhere. In nothingness. She couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Her body felt like it was dissolving into the blackness around her, a part of it, a nothingness that had no boundaries, no end, and no beginning. And then, with a sudden jolt, the stillness was shattered. A gasp tore from her lips as her body was slammed back into the harsh grip of reality. The ground was solid beneath her feet again, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she blinked against the blinding light. She was no longer surrounded by darkness, no longer suspended in the void. She was back. But where? Lena staggered to her feet, her legs shaky beneath her. The world around her had shifted once again. The trees were gone. The forest had evaporated, leaving behind an open, barren space, a vast expanse of cracked earth, stretching into the horizon. There were no signs of life, no whispers of wind, no birdsong. Just an endless wasteland under a sky too dark to be natural. A sky that seemed to pulse with a strange, unfamiliar energy. Everything felt wrong. Lena's pulse quickened, her hands trembling as she took in her surroundings. She could feel it. Something was different this time. The air itself felt thick with tension, charged with an unseen force that buzzed against her skin like static electricity. The very ground beneath her seemed to hum with an ancient power, and the sky looked like it was about to collapse, torn open by some unseen force. She spun around, looking for any sign of movement. But the wasteland was empty, desolate, barren. And then, in the distance, a figure appeared. At first, it was just a silhouette. Tall and dark, standing still against the horizon. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she watched it move closer. The figure growing larger with each passing moment. It was the same shape, the same presence. The figure that had warned her, that had stalked her through the woods, that had dragged her into this place. But now it was something else, more solid, more real. Lena didn't move. She couldn't. Every instinct in her screamed to run. But her body refused to obey. The figure stopped a few feet in front of her, its face still hidden beneath a cloak of darkness. But this time, Lena could feel its presence more acutely. It wasn't just there, it was inside her mind. "Do you see now?" The figure asked, its voice deep, vibrating through the air. "Do you understand?" Lena couldn't speak. Her throat was dry, her heart racing. She wanted to answer, but the weight of the question, of everything, stifled her. The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy, as if the very air was waiting for something. The figure stepped closer, its presence swallowing everything around her, and as it did, Lena felt the earth beneath her feet tremble. It was subtle at first, just a vibration, a hum. But it grew louder, stronger, until the ground was shaking violently, and Lena had to steady herself to keep from falling. "It's happening," the figure said, its tone filled with something between amusement and pity. "You were never meant to walk among the living. You were chosen to see, to witness what others cannot." Lena's chest tightened. What does that mean? She thought, the question racing through her mind. The figure raised its hand, and the world around Lena shifted again, the landscape distorting like the surface of water disturbed by a stone. The barren earth cracked open, fissures spreading like spider webs, and from the cracks, strange, glowing tendrils of light began to rise, twisting and writhing in the air. Lena gasped as the tendrils of light began to move toward her. She didn't understand. It was happening too fast, too violently. "They will see you now," the figure whispered, its voice now low and ominous. "This is the beginning. What you have awakened can never be undone." The light grew brighter, flooding the wasteland around her, until it consumed everything, turning the ground beneath her feet to white, hot stone. Lena could feel the heat against her skin, the energy surrounding her now so intense she could feel it inside her. Her bones aching, her heart pounding in her chest as if it couldn't keep up with the power now coursing through the air. A booming sound echoed from the sky, as though the heavens themselves had cracked open. And then, something shifted, like reality itself was being torn apart at the seams. Lena's body trembled, and the world around her spun, but then, just as quickly, everything stopped. The light dimmed, the ground stilled, and the wasteland fell into an unnatural silence. The only sound was the beating of her own heart, loud in her ears. And then, from the darkness in front of her, the figure spoke again. It's not just the forest, it's everywhere. It's always been. Lena could feel the weight of the words pressing down on her chest, suffocating her. Her mind was reeling. What was happening? What had she done? What is this place? She finally managed to whisper, her voice hoarse. The figure raised its head, its face still hidden, but there was something in the air that made Lena feel as though it was looking at her, judging her. This, the figure said slowly, is where the forgotten things lie. Where the truths that should never have been known remain hidden, buried in the depths of time. The forest is just the beginning. The doorway. Lena took a step back, her heart hammering in her chest. Doorway. A doorway to what? The figure smiled, though Lena couldn't see its face. She could feel it. The smile was cold. To the end of everything. And in that moment, Lena understood. She hadn't just walked into the forest. She hadn't just opened the door to the unknown. She had crossed into something ancient, something that existed beyond time, beyond space. And it was waiting for her. Before Lena could react, the figure turned away, its form dissolving into the shadows as if it had never been there at all. The wasteland around her began to ripple, like water disturbed by a stone. And then, as the ground beneath her feet began to crack open again, she knew there was no escape. The darkness had already claimed her. The doorway had opened, and the end was already beginning. Lena's world was spinning. The cracks in the ground were widening, the earth groaning under an unseen force, and the once still air now churned violently around her. The wasteland was no longer barren. The dark sky above her twisted, swirling, as though it was being pulled in different directions by an invisible hand. And she was caught right in the middle of it. The figure had vanished into the shadows, but its words lingered in her mind, echoing with the weight of something ancient. Something far more terrifying than anything she had ever known. To the end of everything. The words burned through her thoughts, leaving nothing but a cold void in their wake. She had come to the woods seeking answers. She had come unknowingly to the door between worlds. And now there was no going back. The ground continued to tremble beneath her, and the air itself seemed to crackle with a strange energy. The sky above her stretched, bending and warping, as though reality itself was being torn apart. Everything around her felt alive, alive and hungry, pulling at the fabric of existence. The light, those glowing tendrils that had risen from the earth, moved closer now, creeping across the ground, reaching out like grasping hands. Lena's body was frozen, her heart pounding in her chest as she tried to understand what was happening. But there was no time for understanding. The air around her thickened, suffocating her, and she had to fight to take each breath. The whispering started again. This time, it wasn't distant. It was right behind her, circling in her mind, as though the very space around her was alive with voices. Thousands of them, murmuring, chanting, calling her. Lena stumbled backward, her hands reaching out for anything to steady herself. She found nothing but empty air. The wasteland stretched on endlessly, the ground cracked and broken beneath her feet. It was like she had stepped out of time, out of the world she had once known, and into something else. Something wrong. And then she heard it. a deep rumbling from the depths of the earth, as though something beneath her was stirring. The ground beneath her cracked open further, and from the darkness, something large and impossible began to emerge. At first, it was a shadow, a shifting mass of darkness, like an ocean wave made of smoke and mist, creeping up from the cracks in the earth. And then, slowly, it began to take shape. Lena's breath caught in her throat. It was massive, huge, too large for the space it filled. The ground shuddered as it loomed closer, a dark, towering figure emerging from the fissures of the earth. It wasn't like the creatures she had seen before, the ones that moved in and out of shadows. No, this was something else entirely. Its form was incomprehensible, shifting, constantly changing, as if its very existence defied the rules of the world around it. But there were two things that remained constant: the glowing eyes. Two yellow, burning orbs that looked directly at her, piercing through the shadows, through the mist. And then, its voice, low, resonating through the air like thunder, shook the ground beneath her. "You are the key," it said. The voice was both a whisper and a roar, shaking the very air around her. "You will unlock the way." The ground trembled again, the tendrils of light now reaching for the towering figure, as though feeding it, empowering it. The light swirled around the figure's form, and for the first time, Lena understood. The figure wasn't just a part of this world. It was this world. This was the thing that had been waiting for someone to awaken it. The force that had been locked beneath the earth, beneath the very fabric of time and space. And it was here now, and it wanted her. Lena backed away, her legs weak, her mind screaming for her to run. She had no idea what was happening, what was being unlocked, but she could feel it. The force within the creature, within the earth, the forest, it was all coming for her. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible. "I don't understand. What do you want from me?" The figure's glowing eyes blinked, and in that instant, Lena felt something strange, something that seemed to reach inside her. It wasn't just a physical feeling. It was as if it were inside her mind, inside her very soul. "You were chosen to open the way," the figure said again, its voice now a booming thunderclap in her mind. "Your arrival here was not an accident. You are part of the design. And now, you will witness the final unraveling." Lena stumbled backward, her hands grasping for support. The world around her seemed to ripple like water, the very fabric of reality distorting. Folding in on itself, she felt like she was being torn apart, every part of her being stretched beyond its limits. The final unraveling. Before she could even think, the figure surged forward, and Lena felt herself pulled into its presence. The shadows around her consumed her, wrapping themselves around her body, pulling her into the dark. Her vision blurred, her body screamed as though it were being stretched beyond its limits. She gasped for breath, but there was no air. And then the world went black. Lena's body hit the ground with a jarring force, but there was no pain, no sound. She was floating, suspended in nothing. The darkness around her felt alive, as though it were watching her, waiting. For a moment, there was complete silence. But then, far off in the distance, she heard it. A soft whisper at first, faint, barely a sound. But it grew louder, stronger. "Lena!" She knew that voice. It was Mark's voice. "Lena, you need to wake up." Her heart hammered in her chest. Mark was here. But how? How was this possible? The whispering grew louder, and slowly, Lena became aware of a presence beside her. Someone, was reaching for her, pulling her from the depths of darkness. Lena, her eyes fluttered open, and she gasped. She wasn't in the wasteland anymore. She was somewhere else, somewhere cold, somewhere dark, and standing before her, bathed in the faint light of an unknown source, was Mark. Lena's breath came in quick, shallow gasps as she slowly registered the sight before her. Mark was standing there, his figure bathed in a soft, eerie glow that seemed to flicker and fade, much like the dim light that had led her into the woods. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something that resembled fear, but beneath it was something more urgent, something that made Lena's chest tighten with dread. "Mark," her voice cracked, barely audible, as though speaking took all the strength she had left. He took a step forward, his expression a mixture of relief and concern. "Lena, you're alive," he whispered, his voice shaky. "I was afraid I wouldn't reach you in time." Lena pushed herself up from the cold ground, her head spinning. The darkness that had surrounded her moments ago seemed to fade, but there was still a heavy, oppressive feeling in the air. She tried to speak, to ask him what was happening, but no words came. Instead, her mind raced with 1,000 questions, all desperate for answers. "Where am I?" Lena finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. "What is this place? What's happening?" Mark didn't answer immediately. He looked around, his gaze darting to the shadows that seemed to cling to every corner of the space they were in. His shoulders stiffened as if he were trying to block out the very presence of whatever hung in the air. "This is where the worlds meet," Mark said quietly, his eyes haunted, as though he were speaking a truth far darker than he was willing to admit. "The boundary, where the veil between reality and whatever lies beyond it starts to tear." Lena's heart skipped a beat. The veil, beyond reality. She had heard things like this before. The folklore, the whispers of places where the world didn't make sense, where the laws of nature twisted and shattered, but she had never truly believed it. But now, she wasn't so sure. "Wet," she said, her mind reeling. "I don't understand. You mean this is real? This is happening?" Mark's eyes darkened, and he nodded slowly, his voice low. "This is all real, Lena. It's not a dream. It's not some twisted fantasy. This place, it's where the things you thought were stories come to life. The forest, the lights, the creatures, it's all connected. And you've awakened it." Lena staggered back, trying to absorb what Mark was saying, but the weight of his words crushed down on her. She had never believed in anything supernatural, anything beyond the realm of logic and reason. But the events that had unfolded, the figures, the lights, the endless pull toward the woods, were far beyond anything her mind could process. "Awakened what?" she whispered, feeling a tremor deep in her bones. Before Mark could answer, a sound echoed in the distance. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, a low, rhythmic thumping, like the beat of a heart, but far too deep, far too ancient. Lena turned toward the source of the sound, her eyes wide with terror. The ground began to shake again. The same tremors she had felt earlier, but this time they were more intense. The air grew colder, and the whispering voices returned. Only now, they weren't whispers. They were screams. The screams of something unseen, something hungry. Mark grabbed Lena's arm, his grip tight. "We don't have much time," he said, his voice frantic. "The creatures? The things that have been waiting in the dark, they're already coming. They were always here, watching us, and now." Before he could finish, the earth cracked open in front of them, the ground splitting wide. A dark shape rose from the fissure, its form black and formless, like a shadow made flesh. It was tall, unnaturally tall, its limbs stretching out, reaching for them like tendrils of smoke. Lena's breath caught in her throat as she took a step back, her legs shaking. She recognized the figure immediately. It was the same one that had appeared in the forest, the one that had whispered to her, warned her. And now it was here. Mark pulled her away from the edge of the crack in the ground, his eyes wild with fear. "It's not just the creatures. It's the veil, the boundary between our world and whatever lies beyond. It's collapsing, Lena. It's pulling everything in." Lena's mind was racing. The figure in front of them began to take shape, its body flickering like a broken mirror, its eyes glowing with that same unearthly yellow light. It was coming for them. What do we do? Lena asked, panic surging in her chest. Mark's face twisted with desperation. We can't stay here. We need to stop it. We need to close the boundary before it's too late. But I don't know how. I've never been this far before. The figure's voice came again, but this time it was louder, deeper. It filled the air around them, vibrating the very ground beneath their feet. You cannot escape, Lena, the voice hissed. You opened the door, and now you belong to us. Lena felt a cold sweat break out across her forehead as she looked at the figure. It was drawing closer, its form becoming more solid, more real with each passing second. The light around them pulsed, brighter, almost blinding now, and the air seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides. I'm sorry, Mark whispered, his voice barely audible, as though he were apologizing for something far too heavy for her to understand. But this is the only way. Lena turned toward him, confusion flooding her mind. What do you mean? What's the only way? Without warning, Mark pushed her forward, toward the darkness at the edge of the space. Run, he said, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and determination. I'll hold them off. You need to get out. Find the way. Find the door you opened. Lena's heart slammed in her chest. Mark, no. I won't leave you. But Mark was already turning toward the oncoming darkness, his face set in grim resolve. There's no time. I have to stop them. You're the only one who can close it now. Go. Lena's mind spun, her thoughts a blur, but she knew what he was saying. She knew that there was no time, no choice. She had to run. With one last, desperate glance toward Mark, she turned and bolted into the darkness, her feet pounding against the earth as the world around her seemed to break apart. The figure's voice echoed behind her, but she didn't dare look back. The end was coming, and it was up to her to stop it. Lena's feet pounded against the cracked earth as she ran, her breath ragged and shallow. She couldn't look back. She couldn't afford to. Mark was behind her, and he had made it clear that this was the only chance they had. The ground trembled beneath her, and the air hummed with an unnatural energy, as though the very fabric of reality was unraveling around her. She didn't know where she was running, or even if she was heading in the right direction. The wasteland stretched on endlessly, the distorted landscape shifting and warping in ways that defied logic. The sky above her was a sickly hue, its colors swirling like oil on water, and the air was thick with the scent of decay. The ground cracked again, a deep fissure opening up just ahead of her. Lena barely managed to leap over it, her heart in her throat as the earth split apart beneath her. Behind her, she could hear the creature's footsteps, slow, deliberate, following her like a shadow that refused to die. The figure that had haunted her every step, that had drawn her into this nightmare, was still out there. It was coming for her. You cannot escape, the voice whispered, its echo reverberating through the air like 1,000 broken promises. You belong to us. Lena's pulse raced, and she pushed herself harder, forcing her legs to move faster, even though every muscle in her body screamed for rest. She had to keep moving. She had to keep ahead of the darkness that was closing in on her. She had no choice. Her eyes darted around the wasteland, desperately searching for something. Anything that could help her, that could give her an escape. And then, in the distance, she saw it. A faint glow like a beacon in the darkness. A door. The door. Her breath caught in her chest. She didn't know if it was the same one she had opened, or if it was another, but in that moment, it was her only hope. She had to reach it. With renewed determination, Lena pushed herself forward, the light growing brighter as she drew closer. The ground beneath her feet was unstable, shifting with each step, as if the earth itself was fighting her every move. But she couldn't stop. Not now. As she neared the glow, The air around her began to hum with energy. The figure's voice grew louder, more insistent, its presence pressing against her mind, trying to drag her back into the depths of the darkness. "You cannot close it, Lena," the voice hissed. "You cannot undo what you have done." But Lena didn't listen. She didn't stop. She kept running, her body pushing forward with every ounce of strength she had left, until she finally reached the door. It was an ancient thing, its frame twisted and gnarled, its surface covered in strange, glowing symbols that pulsed with an eerie, otherworldly light. The door itself seemed to whisper. As though it recognized her, she didn't hesitate. With trembling hands, she reached out and grasped the handle. The moment her fingers touched it, a wave of energy shot through her body, sending a jolt of pain through her chest. The ground beneath her feet shook violently, and she felt the air grow heavy, suffocating her. "No," she screamed, pulling away from the door. But the force of the energy was too strong. She could feel the darkness closing in around her, the figure behind her growing closer with each passing second. "You belong to us," the voice repeated louder now, filling her mind with a deafening roar. "You cannot escape. You cannot undo it." Lena's heart slammed in her chest. She was so close. She couldn't give up now. She couldn't fail. With a final, desperate cry, Lena gripped the door handle again, this time twisting it with all her strength. The door creaked open, the sound reverberating through the air, and a burst of light exploded from the gap, blinding her for a split second. When the light finally faded, Lena found herself standing in a new world. It was nothing like the wasteland she had just escaped. The air was different here, cleaner, cooler. The sky above her was a vibrant blue, the sun shining brightly, casting a warm glow on the earth beneath her feet. She could hear birds in the distance, the sound of wind rustling through trees. It was peaceful. For a moment, Lena stood there, blinking in disbelief. Had she made it? Had she escaped the nightmare? But then she heard it, a faint whisper, barely audible, yet unmistakable. "You cannot hide forever, Lena." The voice echoed through the air, cold and ominous. It was the same voice, the same figure, and it was still out there, still waiting for her. Lena's stomach turned. She had escaped the wasteland, but she hadn't escaped the thing that had been hunting her. The darkness, it was following her. With a sinking heart, Lena turned away from the door, but the world around her was already beginning to warp. The trees were bending, the sky darkening, the ground beneath her feet shaking once more. She had thought she was free, but the truth was far darker than she could have imagined. The door had not been a way out. It had been a way in, a door into something far worse, something that would never let her go. And now there was no escape. Not for her, not for anyone. As the ground cracked open once again, and the shadows crept in, Lena realized the truth. The end had already come. Lena's legs buckled beneath her as the ground trembled once again, the earth cracking and shifting beneath her feet. The air was thick with the sounds of distant rumbling, as though the world itself were in the process of being torn apart. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat a painful reminder that her escape was only temporary. The door she had come through began to distort, flickering in and out of existence like a mirage. The bright world she had found herself in, the world that seemed so peaceful, so untouched, was unraveling. The sky darkened, the once blue expanse now swirling with ominous clouds. The trees that had stood tall and welcoming moments ago began to twist and bend, their branches reaching toward her like skeletal hands. Lena's breath caught in her throat. The whispers began again, growing louder, more insistent, filling her mind with an unrelenting sense of dread. "You cannot hide," the voice hissed, its coldness cutting through her very soul. "You will never escape us." The ground beneath her feet shook violently, throwing her off balance. She caught herself on a nearby tree, her fingers digging into the bark as she tried to steady herself. The world was shifting around her, folding in on itself like a nightmare that refused to release its hold. Her mind raced, her thoughts spinning wildly. What was happening? What was this place? She had thought she had escaped. She had believed the door would lead her to safety. But instead, it had brought her here, a place that seemed to exist outside of time and space. A place where the rules didn't apply. A place where the darkness was waiting for her. Lena's eyes darted around the landscape, searching for any sign of hope, any way out. The door, the one she had passed through, was no longer visible. It had disappeared, swallowed by the darkness. The world around her was collapsing, twisting, and there was no way back. The figure, the one that had been hunting her from the beginning, was still here, somewhere. She could feel its presence, lurking in the shadows. She could hear its voice, closer now, like a low growl that reverberated through the air. You opened the door. Lena? The voice whispered again. You brought us here. Lena staggered back, her pulse quickening as the ground beneath her seemed to give way once more. The earth cracked open. And from the depths, she saw them. Creatures, twisted and grotesque, emerging from the dark fissures in the ground. They were tall, their limbs too long, their bodies twisted and malformed. Their eyes, burning yellow orbs, locked onto her with a hunger that made her stomach churn. The creatures moved toward her, their movements jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by an unseen hand. They were coming for her, closing in with every passing second. No. Lena turned to run. But the earth around her seemed to shift and warp, pushing her in every direction, as if the very ground was fighting against her. She stumbled, falling to her knees, her heart racing in terror. The creatures were almost upon her now, their monstrous forms filling her vision. She could hear their low growls, their whispers, echoing in her ears. You cannot escape. Lena's breath caught in her throat as the first of the creatures reached her, its clawed hand reaching for her with unnatural speed. But just as it was about to touch her, a blinding light exploded from the ground beneath her. The force of the light sent the creature stumbling backward, its body writhing as though it were in pain. The light spread outward, expanding, consuming everything in its path. The ground cracked open, and the creatures screeched as the light overwhelmed them, dissolving their forms into nothingness. Lena shielded her eyes from the blinding radiance, her heart pounding in her chest. She couldn't comprehend what was happening. The creatures were gone, but the light was still here, surrounding her, pulsing with an energy that felt both terrifying and powerful. The light began to fade, and when Lena opened her eyes again, the wasteland was gone. The twisted, broken landscape had vanished, replaced by a vast, open field. The sky above her was once again clear, the sun shining brightly. The birds were singing, the wind was gentle, and for a moment, Lena wondered if she had imagined everything. But the feeling in her chest, the weight of the darkness, the knowledge that something was watching her, remained. The figure stood before her, its presence as imposing as ever, its eyes glowing with an intensity that burned into her soul. You think you've escaped, it said, its voice low and menacing. But this is only the beginning. Lena staggered backward, her legs weak beneath her. The ground beneath her feet trembled again, and the sky darkened, the once blue expanse swirling with the same ominous clouds. The figure raised its hand, and the air grew cold, biting at her skin. You opened the door, Lena, it said again, the words dripping with malice. And now you will never be free. Lena's eyes widened as she felt a sudden shift in the air. The sky above her crackled with energy, and the ground beneath her feet began to break apart. The figure's shadow stretched out, covering the entire field, and the light that had surrounded her began to fade, consumed by the darkness that was once again creeping in. You will see the truth. The figure whispered, its voice now a distorted, otherworldly sound. "You will see everything." Lena screamed as the world around her twisted, as the ground shattered beneath her, and the sky broke open. The light vanished, and the darkness rushed in. And in the midst of it all, the figure's voice echoed one final time. "You opened the door, Lena, and now you are ours." Lena's scream was swallowed by the oppressive darkness, the sound lost in the shifting void. Her feet no longer felt the ground beneath her, and for a moment, she was suspended in the infinite blackness, weightless. The figure loomed above her, its shadow expanding, swallowing the light, twisting the world into something unrecognizable. "You think you're strong enough to escape?" The figure's voice reverberated through her skull, a sickening blend of mockery and inevitability. "You should never have opened the door." The dark whispers grew louder, a cacophony that gnawed at her mind. They weren't just words, they were an infection, a poison, seeping into her very thoughts. She could feel them writhing inside her, wrapping around her consciousness like tendrils. There was no refuge from them. And then, in a sudden shift, the darkness snapped into place, solidifying. The ground reformed beneath her, not as the field she had seen earlier, but as an endless expanse of cracked earth, stretching far beyond what she could see. The sky was black, and the sun, if it had ever existed, was a memory that she could no longer reach. The air was heavy, saturated with the weight of loss and despair. Lena stumbled forward, her breath ragged, her heart thundering in her chest. There was no running. She could feel it. No matter how fast she moved, the shadows would follow, creeping just behind her, pressing closer with every step. The figure stood at the edge of her vision, always there, always watching, waiting. "You opened the door," it repeated, its voice softer now, but no less chilling. "You invited us in, Lena. There is no escaping that decision. No running from what you've brought upon yourself." Lena's mind raced as the weight of the truth crushed her. She hadn't just escaped the Westland. She had entered a new prison, one where the darkness was not merely a presence, but a part of her now. She could feel it inside, a coldness that spread through her veins, chilling her to the bone. She was no longer herself. She was the door, the key, the conduit for something far worse. The figure had said it before, it was the beginning. "Don't you see?" The figure's voice was close now, a whisper against her ear, like the wind caressing the skin of the dead. "You were never meant to be free. You were meant to bring us here. And now we will never leave." Lena's legs buckled, her body succumbing to the weight of her own despair. The earth around her cracked open again. But this time it wasn't filled with creatures. No. This time, the cracks were filled with her own darkest memories, regrets, fears, the faces of those she had lost. Her past, her choices, her mistakes, all of it had come to claim her. As the darkness spread, her vision blurred. The ground trembled once more, not in the violent rage she had known before, but in a slow, inevitable collapse, like the end of a long, drawn-out breath. She could feel the world around her breaking, falling apart. But this time she didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply accepted it. The figure reached out a hand, its fingers elongated and twisted. It didn't need to touch her. The darkness had already claimed her. "You opened the door, Lena," it whispered one final time, and the darkness consumed her whole. The door, the key, the beginning, the end.